Welcome to the first week in November. This month is all about creation and the mind. And this first week, we're going to look real closely at the creation cycle. There's an actual cycle that happens that is step by step, very methodical, and very predictable that creates the outcomes in our lives. And what's beautiful about it is that we are in control of it. You are a divine creator. In Ayurveda, we study and talk a lot about that divine spirit or that divinity within each of us, that part of source. And that part of source within us is a creator. You know this when you feel those creative inclinations, when you want to do something that's beautiful and create something beautiful in the world, when you want to say something in a certain way, when you have a new idea or a thought that comes to you, whether you create a person through the creation of a child, you create a business through the creation of a career, or you're creating your own life, every moment you are your own creator. And everything in your world that exists in your reality is within the power of possibility or creation. There is no limit to it. Really, imagination is the only limit, and the laws of actual nature. We have to follow the laws of nature. But the laws of nature are all that governs it. And beyond that, anything is within our power. We can create anything that we can conceive with the mind. What influences this is the lens of belief. These are the beliefs that create a lens through which we see the world. Everyone has a different lens of belief, and these beliefs shape how we view things that happen to us, how we view the situations in life, how we view other people, how we view what they say, how we view what happens around us. There's other factors as well that influence how we create our world. They are beliefs that we mentioned, tendencies that accompany our prakriti. We've talked about these before. Each dosha has a tendency, and these tendencies manifest in different ways for individual doshas. For example, a vata has a tendency in situations of stress to feel anxiety or worry. A pitta in situations of stress has a tendency to feel anger and criticism. A kapha in times of stress has a tendency to feel lethargy or attachment. They might withdraw from the situation rather than engage. Now, these samskaras are deep seated tendencies that are in our subconscious. We'll talk more about these this month. For now, just good to understand that these exist, that they're harder to identify because they are part of our subconscious, and our goal is to continue to become more aware of them, start to question them, the things that we automatically think and feel. And then the gunas influence our world. So when we're in creation mode, the quality or nature of our mind, whether we have a sattvic mindset, rajasic, or tamasic, are going to be very influential about whether we see things clearly, whether we see things with a cloudy view, or whether we're completely ignorant to what's actually happening in reality. So all of these things influence the beliefs that we have and the ability we have to see the world in a certain way. Now, this lens of belief is influential on our thoughts. When a person has a thought, it doesn't just show up out of thin air. It doesn't just magically manifest. Thoughts are influenced and shaped by your lens of belief. So remember, those are our beliefs, tendencies, samskaras, and gunas. That's why we each have different thoughts about a situation that we live in. We can be faced with the exact same situation. We can stand on the scale and see the weight on the scale, and one person can stand on the scale and see that same weight as the person next to them, and they're going to have different thoughts about the exact same situation. That's because their lens of belief is different. And this is helpful because sometimes it's hard for us to understand how everyone else around us doesn't see the world the way we do. And they don't believe exactly like we do. And a tendency is for us to think that they must be wrong. But in reality, they just have a different lens of belief, and we are no more right than they are right. Just our lens of beliefs are different. When we put this all together into the creation cycle, it gives us some power. We can start to actually influence change within ourselves. Change is one of the hardest things. We might know a lot of things within Ayurveda that we want to do differently, or principles or things that we know would be more helpful or more balancing for us. But getting ourselves to actually do them differently requires that we go not from the doing and the outcome level, but back to the thoughts. Here's how the creation cycle works. We have a situation. A situation influences our thoughts. We're having a thought about this situation now. These thoughts are creating an emotion. This emotion is creating what you do. And what you do is creating the outcome or the world that you live in, your reality. What's beautiful is you are 100% at cause in your life. You are 100% responsible for the outcomes that you're achieving in life. If this sounds like you're feeling blamed, it's not that at all. It's that you have the ability to respond, the ability to change, the ability to create something different than what you're already experiencing. So let's go through each step one by one to help you really understand this more fully. Step one is the situation. This is what happened. If you were to tell a story to someone, this is what happened in that situation. It's something you cannot control. These are the facts. It's the facts that no one can argue about. If I saw the situation, you saw the situation, it would be the same, right? There's no disagreement. We can all agree on it. There's no opinion or drama to this, right? I'm not putting what I think about it on top of the situation. I'm just stating the situation. It's actually quite boring. A situation has no emotion behind it. It's just boring. It's here's the facts. It's the math of life. It's very neutral. It's not right or wrong. It's neutral. It's just what happened, what is. So let's give some examples of situations. Here's a situation. I weigh 200 pounds. That's a situation. Okay. Here's another situation. I have a house. It's a situation we can all agree. Here is a house. It is my house. I have a house. How about I have X number of dollars in my bank account, right? That is math. We can't argue with that. We can look at it on paper and see this is what is in my bank account in this very moment. Or here's the situation. My son came home after curfew. That's a situation we can all agree on that. We can look at the clock, see what time he walks in the door, and see my son came home after curfew, right? It's a really good way to look at that. So, step two of this are the thoughts that are created about the situation. This is where our lens of belief comes into play. So, a thought is subjective. It's not something that we're all going to have exactly the same, right? It's very personal to each person. It's opinionated. It's what you think about the situation. And the good way to know if it's a thought or not is to ask, could this be proven in a court of law? Most of the time, the answer will be no. That's how you know it's a thought. The thought is optional. You don't have to think this thought. When you come home and the living room is messy and you think, my family doesn't respect me, they're so messy all the time. You had a choice and that thought was optional. You didn't have to think that thought, and another person might not have that thought. They might come and see this messy house and instead decide to think, I am so glad that I'm home and that I have people who live in this house in order to create this environment so it shows that we live here, right? So we get to choose. You get to choose your thoughts. And thoughts will often show up as questions. They might be things like, why can't he do it my way? Why is the government so messed up? What is wrong with me that I can't lose weight? So, all of these thoughts can then lead us into things that are positive or aspects that are negative, things that are useful or not useful. But it's a good way to realize you're having a thought if you're asking yourself questions. If you come home to that same messy living room and your husband was watching your kids, you might have a thought of, why can't he clean up when I'm gone? Doesn't he understand that I'm tired? So, that is a thought. That is not reality. That is your own interpretation of a situation. And it's good to always remember that your thoughts are being influenced all the time at a subconscious level. You don't even realize it by beliefs that you hold that were not even chosen by you, right? They might have been influenced by other people in your space. They were influenced by your tendencies and your samskaras and those gunas, whether the nature of your mind is sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. Let's run through it and add our lens belief to the situation. The situation is, I weigh 200 pounds. We could choose this thought, I am too fat, right? You might not choose that thought, but let's pretend that's the thought you chose. This is coming from a belief lens that I am a better person when I am thinner because now I'm thinking I'm too fat. The tendencies for this or those samskaras are tendencies for judgment coming from pitta dosha. You could have that tendency more strongly if you are pitta dosha. The guna that is manifesting here is rajasic, a lot of judgment. If these are still a little confusing to you, don't worry. We're going to work on the gunas a lot this month as well, so you'll understand that a little bit better. Here's the next situation. I have a house. The thought, my house is so old, I can't have company over. The belief lens, my worth is connected to the kind of house I live in. And that creates coming from a tendency of anxiety or worry, right? When faced with this stressful thought of my house is so old, I can't have company over, that tendency to feel anxiety and worry rises up, and that is creating that thought. So they kind of come together. And then that guna is rajasic or worry. We have a lot of movement going on in the mind. There's not a lot of peace or calm. You'll notice that with most thoughts that are not positive and coming from our higher space, they're going to be either rajasic or tamasic. Very rarely will they be sattvic. Next situation. I have X number of dollars in my bank account. Thought. We don't have enough money. We are going to lose the house. The lens belief is that security comes from money. Another person might have a completely different lens belief, and their thought's going to be different because of that. The tendency here, that deep-seated doshic tendency of anxiety and worry, is coming from vata, and the guna again is rajasic, and there's worry involved. So you can kind of see how this starts to flow. Here's our last one. The situation: my son came home after curfew. The thought: he doesn't respect me or he would come home on time. The lens belief is that obedience from kids shows respect towards me. So my tendency in this situation as a pitta would be to have anger. And the guna is rajasic because there's anger coming up. Anger is a very rajasic emotion. Okay, so we're seeing that the situation's happening. There's a thought. Underlying that thought or surrounding that thought are these beliefs that we hold. And because my belief is different than your belief, you might have a different thought. What's great is we can change our beliefs. We can work on our beliefs. We can look at where we're limited in our beliefs and then start to shift those. Now we move to step 3. So we looked at the situation. We had step 2 was our thought about the situation. And step 3 is the emotion that's being created because of the thought. So thoughts create emotions. Thoughts are the reason for your emotions. It's where they come from. And emotions are driving all of your behaviors. So you can see how these thoughts are really important, these thoughts and the beliefs that go with them. So let's look at this. The reason you do what you do or want what you want is to have a certain emotion. I want to feel healthy. So my reason for wanting to lose weight is because I want to have this joy or this lightness of feeling healthy, right? I'm going after the emotion. It's not so much the weight on the scale that's important to me. It's how I'm feeling once I hit that weight. The reason you do what you do or what you want is to avoid a certain emotion. So maybe you don't want to feel lonely. And so you spend your time going out in the evenings, even when you're exhausted, because you don't want to be home feeling lonely. It's driving your behavior to avoid an emotion. This is a really good exercise to go through when you are in a situation where you're having a strong emotion or you're doing something, you're trying to identify, why am I doing this? Is it to have a certain emotion or to avoid a certain emotion? We spend a lot of our time avoiding emotions, and we're going to work on that this month, how to feel our emotions all the way through. But it's good if we understand whether we're trying to have an emotion and create it or if we want to avoid it, because there's different strategies for each one. And we'll get into those, so don't worry about that yet. So let's run through it. The situation is I weigh 200 pounds. The thought, I am too fat, causing this emotion of depressed. And it might be different for you. You could have that same thought and have a different type of emotion. So these are just some examples here. The situation, I have a house. My thought, my house is so old, I can't have company over. The emotion, embarrassed. The situation, I have X number of dollars in my bank account. Thought, we don't have enough money, we're going to lose the house. Emotion, panic. You can see the kind of actions that are going to come from these that we'll talk about next. The situation, my son came home after curfew. Thought, he doesn't respect me or he would come home on time. The emotion created is anger. So the next step, step 4, is what we actually do. So we had the situation happens. We have a thought about the situation. The thought creates an emotion, and then we do something with that emotion. So your emotions create what you do. When we start at this space to create change, it rarely works. And that's what a lot of us do, even right now while we're in scholars. That's why this is really important for you to understand and learn this, that just because you're trying to change the action is not going to necessarily change what you're feeling, and it won't last. It's going to be based on willpower, and you'll end up giving up after a while. So we want to go back to the thought stage and create a new belief or a new thought in order to create real lasting change. So let's run through it here. This situation, you're getting to get real familiar with these. I weigh 200 pounds. Thought, I am too fat. Emotion, depressed. What I do, stay in bed and eat ice cream. That's not very useful, is it? Next one, the situation, I have a house. Thought, my house is so old I can't have company over. The emotion, embarrassed. What I do: nag my husband about fixing up the house, avoid getting close to neighbors, never invite people over. The situation: I have X number of dollars in my bank account. Thought: we don't have enough money, we're going to lose the house. Emotion: panic. What I do: shop therapy, fight my husband about money, lose sleep as I worry. Last one, the situation: my son came home after curfew. The thought: he doesn't respect me or he would come home on time. The emotion: anger. What I do: make some passive aggressive comments towards him, yell at him and tell him I'm disappointed, distance myself from him. So here is where we go from there. You do something, and that next step is the outcome. This is what your world is like, what you've created in life. It applies to every area of life. It doesn't just apply to specific aspects. Everything in your life is created through this creation cycle. You are responsible for your outcomes, like we mentioned before. That doesn't mean you're to blame. It means you have the ability to respond. You have the ability to create the change. But you are not responsible for other people's outcomes. When we go back to the example of my son coming home late after curfew, and this is actually a real thing that happens in my house. And so it's something we're in the middle of figuring out. So I have a responsibility for the outcomes, what I take, the actions I take, and the feelings that I have after I take those actions. But I'm not responsible for how he responds, right? His outcome has nothing to do with me. In fact, it's really none of my business. If he decides in his response to withdraw, to alienate himself from the family, and to throw a tantrum and slam cabinets, which those are all things that have happened in my house, I can get caught up in that if I want, but that's not useful. That's his creation cycle, right? He had a thought about staying out past curfew. He had an emotion that he followed. He did the action of staying out, and then he has an outcome. And his outcome is not connected to me. So it's important that we start to understand we're not responsible for other people's outcomes. And the outcome is always proof of the thought that's driving it. That one will take a little bit of practice, so we'll get into that a little. Okay, so here we're going to go through the whole creation cycle now. The situation: I weigh 200 pounds. Thought: I am too fat. Emotion: depressed. Do: stay in bed and eat ice cream. Outcome: I gain more weight. I am still too fat. Do you see how the gaining more weight and I'm still too fat connects back to that original thought of I am too fat? It's like my outcome is reinforcing that original thought. The situation: I have a house. Thought: my house is so old I can't have company over. Emotion: embarrassed. What I do: nag my husband about fixing up the house, avoid getting close to neighbors, never invite people over. The outcome: create a negative relationship with my husband. House doesn't get fixed up, I can't have company over. So when you look at the thought that came from that, my house is so old I can't have company over, the result is the house doesn't get fixed up, I can't have company over. The outcome reinforces the thought. It shows that that thought is the actual thought you're having about your house because it matches the outcome. The situation: I have X number of dollars in my bank account. Thought: we don't have enough money, we're going to lose the house. The emotion: panic. What I do: shop therapy, fight with my husband about money, lose sleep as I worry. The outcome: I damage the relationship with my husband. I spend way too much money and I'm not able to pay bills. This ties back to that original thought. That thought of we don't have enough money, we're going to lose the house. And then I start spending too much money, I'm not able to pay the bills. So I probably will lose the house. So it shows that that works, right? That we have a cycle here that is an accurate cycle. Sometimes when we're working through these, we have to look at the thought differently. We might not have the actual thought that's creating the outcome. That's how come we always test it at the end to make sure that the outcome is reinforcing or matching that thought. So this puts the creation cycle here into its full measure. We have a situation, right? A situation is influencing the thought. The thought creates the emotion. The emotion creates what you do, and what you do creates your outcomes. Then we check the outcome. Does it match with the thought? This will take some practice, and in this week's homework assignment, we're talking a lot about how this works, so read the handout. I know it's a little bit long. It includes some of these examples as well as many more so that you can get more comfortable with how the creation cycle actually works, and then it gives you places you can practice. I recommend that you do one creation cycle a day at least. So when you have a situation come up and there's a thought that you possibly are not loving, that's a good one to start with, then put that into your creation cycle. and run a cycle on it. See if you can figure out what thought is driving the emotion you're feeling and what are you doing because you have that emotion. What is the outcome that you're achieving in your life? And then check it, make sure it matches your thought. This will take some practice. We'll have a call about this week as well, and another one at the end of the month. So you'll have opportunities to work through this. I want you to make sure that you're constantly thinking now, what is the thought? I'm having a situation. What is the thought? And begin to separate what is a situation, what is a thought. Sometimes those can be confusing. We can think that our thought is the situation. So, this is our week to test reality. We're going to question everything. What is actually going on? What is actually happening here? Is it a thought? Is it the situation? Most of the time, we assume our thoughts are the situation, but they are not. They are subjective, they are not neutral. Situations are completely neutral. If it helps you to go back and watch this again, there's a lot of information here that might be very useful for you. So enjoy this first week, really jump into creating intentionally. This is going to take some practice and it's going to be beautiful. It will change everything for how you're implementing your Ayurvedic practices. So enjoy your week and we'll talk to you on the live calls.